Victoria Cañadas and myself will moderate this session that I think is very, very interesting. So we are going to see some of the most interesting aspects of idiopathic ventricular arrhythmias, and we will see how to characterize and ablate the different types of PVCs and VTs. So we will have with us Dr. Fermín García, Dr. Yuki Komatsu, and they will speak each one of them about different and interesting aspects. So Victoria will explain you some things about the system to vote.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this interesting session. Before moving to the presentation, I would like to remind you some practical issues. Remember that each session has a QR code, and by scanning it, you can get access to some additional information, and you can submit a question as well for discussion. Discussion, anyway, will be at the end of the three presentations. With no delay, I would like to introduce our first speaker, which is Fermín García, and he's going to illustrate us about anatomical approach to ablate outflow tract ventricular tachycardias.
Okay, so I've been asked to do this in English, not in Spanish, but I'm honored to be here, and I thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity to present to you. My first slide is very simple. It's to define what I am going to be talking about. The traditional way of looking at outflow tract VT is simply related to the position of the heart on the chest and the relationship with the 12-lead electrocardiogram. And if we think of the outflow tract as simply the top portion of the heart, as a definition, everything that I'm going to be talking about is a site of origin or an exit or an arrhythmia that has a component of positivity, predominantly in lead 2, 3, and AVF. And this is the simple aspect of this. From a practical standpoint, however, the main thing that I will try to transmit to you is to understand the relationship between the outflow tracts. If we look at the heart from anterior to posterior, most of the outflow tract that we're going to be looking at, it's the right ventricle. However, not only do we need to look from anterior to posterior, but also from right to left. As we see here, the RVOT, it's located mostly on the left side of the chest. And this is going to have a lot of implications at the moment of looking at the electrocardiogram. And the RVOT, which is in front of the LVOT, pushes it behind, the LVOT being on the right side of the chest. From a better pragmatic standpoint, I prefer to look at outflow tract arrhythmias from a posterior to anterior view, because it really opens the complexity of the altitudinal orientation of the heart, right versus left, anterior versus posterior, top versus bottom. And you can see how if we look from posterior aspect, you understand that this is not only the right ventricle, but everything related to the mitral valve, the aorta, and the outflow tract region of both ventricles. So in my personal opinion, this is the only algorithm you're going to have to know, and I do not have to memorize, and I am not going to transmit to you all the work done by many groups. But this is a simple algorithm that is based on understanding the anatomy on the book and understanding the anatomy of the patient, which could be different than the anatomy of the book. So you need to understand the anatomy of your patient. And you need to somehow come with a clue from the electrocardiogram to localize an area. This is not about saying where are you going to ablate or the site of origin. This is about thinking an area where you're going to map, and that could include 2 or 3 different sites. But more importantly, it rules out sites that it's impossible for that EKG to come from. By doing that, you're going to limit your ablation and your mapping strategy. And then once you have this hypothesis, you're going to utilize technology of whatever sort you want to try to find the area of interest. And whenever you ablate and you are unsuccessful, you have to rethink everything because perhaps your anatomy concept for that patient was wrong. And this is what we propose as a practical approach. I'm going to divide alpha-LoTrieVT in two aspects. Based on this anterior-posterior view and posterior-anterior view, I divide a midline that could be random, but it positions yourself into two sides on the heart. The first group of arrhythmias are those that originate or are ablated from the right side of the midline. Because these sites of origin are on the right side of the midline, they classically are going to have a positivity in lead 1, and they're going to be more negative in AVR than AVL. And whenever you look at these areas, you're going to focus on these structures, the posterior right ventricular outflow tract, parahison region, all the way to the tricuspid valve. And this is very sensitive, I'm sorry. The right coronary cusp and the posterior aspect of the left ventricular outflow tract. So if you look at the right ventricle, it's a very simple structure. You have 5 points of attachment. If you cut these 5 points of attachment, you end with 2 structures. You end in your hand with the septum, and you end with the right ventricular free wall. These are, of course, connected by the moderator band, which you would have to dissect to get these 2 aspects. When you look at alpha-LoTrac anatomy, this is as simple as it gets, and the arrhythmias we're going to map are going to come from somewhere in these areas. And what I'm going to try to transmit to you is the particular challenges of each aspect of the ablation. The other concept that would be very important for you to understand as you look at this presentation is what we call the neighbors. The neighbor of the posterior RVOT, in this case, the right coronary cusp, is very different than the neighbor from the anterior RVOT, which is in the left side of the chest. And this becomes very useful at the time of mapping an ablation. For the free wall, there is certain characteristics on the electrocardiogram that points you to mapping the free wall of the right ventricular outflow tract. The more posterior you are, at Penn we call this side 1. The more anterior, we call this side 3. It doesn't really matter, but more posterior is more positive in 1, more anterior is negative in 1, and the reversal, AVR more negative than AVL, AVL more negative than AVR. The classic characteristics are a late precordial transition, they're notched in the QRS, the QRS is wider because you're away from the midline, and they're less positive on the inferior leads because there's not that much mass to activate. Whenever you see these EKGs, you have to think on the anatomical aspect of the RV free wall. The close relationship with the RCA is going to be helpful, and I'll show you why at the moment of mapping, and the pulmonic cusp are going to be very useful. In our approach anatomically to this, we use a lot of intracardiac echo. And the reason we use intracardiac echo is because if we understand this anatomical picture, and I can place the echo in a way on the heart that will reflect what I'm seeing here, I can guide my ablation. This is a view obtained from the RV outflow tract with the echo looking up. This is the aorta, and this is the takeoff of the right coronary artery. You can imagine the aorta sitting here, and this is the right coronary artery. Right in front is the semilunar aspect of the free wall of the RVOT, and you know it's the free wall of the RVOT because you see the RCA. And this is the concept of a neighbor. If you identify a particular neighbor topographically, you know what's opposite to that. So you decide to ablate here, and you have to place this catheter in good contact here, just below the pulmonic valve. And sometimes you're able to do this without any problems, but sometimes you fail. And this is the first example of understanding anatomy to guide your ablation. The close relationship with the coronary cusps, the 3 pulmonic cusps, the right, the posterior, and the left, come very useful at the moment of mapping the free wall of the RVOT. And the reason for this, in a very beautiful paper recently from Anderson and the Spanish group, is particularly histologically in the RVOT, the muscle really comes around the pulmonic artery, all the way around. So if you try to map this and you have bad contact from below, it's feasible that your best approach is to approach it from above to get better contact. So this becomes very useful because the reality is that you will be burning ventricular tissue through the coronary cusp. And this is very important at the moment of defining where you are ablating. It's not what you are ablating, it's where you are ablating from. You're still ablating ventricular tissue, but you're burning it from the coronary cusp. This is an example of a late transition left bundle PVC with inferior axis notch, classic for free wall. Very nice signal. And the position on the ablation catheter, it's here. It was impossible to ablate it from below. This is a failed procedure twice for this PVC. And I will show you this image so you understand how just placing the catheter with a loop, injecting from the tip of the thermocle so you know exactly where you are and you can see the pulmonic cuff. It allows to have very good contact and takes away the influence of respiration. And this is the key, understanding the anatomical side, because then you will understand the challenge and try to overcome the challenge to be successful. The next aspect is the septum of the RV. And when we talk about this, and I will show this later, the most anterior aspect of the RVOT below the pulmonic valve, it's on the left side of the chest. It will produce a negative deflection in lead 1. But the things that we're going to talk about here in this segment is everything that goes from the posterior aspect of the RVOT below the pulmonic valve to the tricuspid valve in this whole circular area of the infundibulum. Opposite to that is the right coronary cusp. This will become very important. This is a very nice picture, and I think explains everything from gross anatomy to histology. What are we doing here? This is from 1997. This is from the same paper recently in Heart Rhythm. I'm going to take you around. Anterior, it's on top. Posterior, it's in the back. You have the pulmonic valve. By definition, anything below the pulmonic valve is RVOT, anything above is pulmonary artery, mitral valve, aortic mitral continuity, etc. Left coronary cusp, non-coronary cusp, right coronary cusp. What are we targeting when we talk about these positive PVCs in lead 1? Is the segment of muscle, essentially the top of the LV ostium, the ventricular muscle that wraps around the aorta, and it has a component on the RVOT, and it has a component that you can target from the opposite side. All the way from the pulmonic valve to the tricuspid valve. And you can see this circular pattern here, producing these typical PVCs. This could be one of the most difficult places to get good contact in the RVOT. Reason for, sometimes we get better contact and get away by burning from the right coronary cusp, which is perfectly behind this tissue and perfect for positioning the catheter to get successful ablation. So now you take that gross anatomy, histological anatomy, and you do intracardiac echo. And this is exactly the same figure, except with your patient beating heart alive on the table. You get RVOT from the pulmonic valve all the way here to the tricuspid valve. You get the pulmonary artery, left atrium. You have non-coronary cusp, left coronary cusp, right coronary cusp. This is what we're targeting. So you can define the gross of this tissue. Sometimes it's 0.5 centimeter, sometimes it's 1.5 centimeter, and you need more power to ablate this. And you immediately understand where you're going, how you're going. This view, it's very useful for RVOT ablation with the two views. One from the right atrium, in which you look down from the right atrium and you see it in long axis. You can see a right coronary cusp here, the tricuspid valve, pulmonary artery, my ablation catheter placed right opposite to the right coronary cusp. And then once you advance the catheter, you can see it here, look up, you have the short axis view. You can see the same catheter here in perfect position below the pulmonic valve in front of the right coronary cusp. These are the two views that we use for this. There's no more views. This is on one view, tells you everything. And with that, you can work. Because what we're trying to target is this. Classic VT morphology, left bundle transition in B4, more positive in 2 than 3. Text to you about something on the right side of the midline, positive in 1, more negative in AVR than AVL. Classic posterior aspect of the right ventricular outflow tract. PVC morphology and VT for this, we map the RVOT, perfect pace map. Early, catheter position very good. I put this here for those of you who are used to fluoroscopy, you can see we usually use a sheath for support. Despite ablation here, we could not eliminate DVT in this particular patient. So what do you do? Again, comes the understanding of anatomy to overcome this challenge. You ask yourself, what is opposite to me? And it's the right coronary cos. You don't go to the anterior RVOT, you don't go anywhere else but opposite. And in this case, you can see the representation. This is how it looks on the anatomy. This is the reconstruction with ultrasound. You can clearly see the relationship between the right coronary cos, posterior aspect of the RVOT, posterior aspect of the RVOT. Place the catheter there. Something that looked early in the posterior RVOT, suddenly super early in the right coronary cos. And you know you're in the right place. This area, you have to be very careful because PaceMap could capture the conduction system and you can be at the best activation site and the PaceMap is not very good. I put fluoroscopy so just to get an idea. This is a patient that required bipolar ablation for a very thick tissue on this septum, and you can see how the catheters are opposite to each other in this posterior aspect and the right coronary cos. And again, at the moment of ablation, the lesions are placed with the catheter having good contact. You can know exactly where your catheter is in the right coronary cos, and the key, other two keys for successful ablation is going to be contact force, but not only the force, but the vector of orientation. You don't want that catheter necessarily pointing completely down. You want it pointing down and towards the septum because you know that's the muscle you're trying to target. So you use every single aspect of this technique to direct your ablation lesion. This, it's another challenge area. We published this recently as a series of cases, a similar EKG pattern of what I discussed, but this is coming from the area around the tricuspid valve. The most important structure to identify is the Eustachian ridge because this is your enemy when you try to enter the right ventricle. With intracardiac echo, you see it right away. So you know that if you have to work in this area, you have to bend that Eustachian ridge down. We use, in this case, an Agilus, open enough space to put a loop behind the tricuspid valve and then have good contact. This patient has failed 2 ablations before, simply because there's no understanding of how to work with the anatomy instead of working against the anatomy. You have to work around the valve. This is how this catheter will look in fluoroscopy. Hard to see the tricuspid valve here, hard to see the Eustachian ridge, and it's very easy to guide it this way. Again, one way to overcome these limitations. I'm going to just show this for a Parahesian case that was referred to me. And the third component to take into consideration is that every patient anatomy could be different. This is a patient with a dilated aorta in which the axis of the ventricle is very, very flat. And when we look at intracardiac echo, the dilated aorta pushes everything down. When we look at this PVC, which is a late transition, initially thought to be Parahesian, we ended targeting from the right coronary cusp because simply, you have to take into consideration that no EKG rule is perfect and the anatomy on one patient to another can change. So you have to use your own patient as the control for that particular anatomy. In fact, we had a series of patients with right coronary cos ablation guided by echo, in which most of them had transition in B3, which is the usual, more positive in 2 than 3, more negative in AVR than AVL. But look at this, off the charts, patients with a rotated heart towards the left, right bundle, no transition. Patients with the heart rotated to the right with a dilated aorta, left bundle, late transition, all ablated from the right coronary cos. So the key here is to understand the anatomy for the particular patient. The only last portion that has a positivity in one and is still AffloTrack, we published this also recently, last year, or 2016, I'm sorry, in which we mapped to this area, right below the non-coronary cusp. And we ablated there in something that was presumed to be Parahesian, that we had failed before. And we decided to map opposite to that. Opposite to that was this structure. We really didn't know what we were doing. And when we realized what we were doing, we were simply targeting the posterior aspect of the left ventricle, you can see it right here, from this. It's the right atrium. So it turns out that the right atrium covers this portion of the posterior superior aspect of the left ventricle. So again, the only way we figure this out, how to put the catheter here, is because when we look at eyes, we couldn't go epi, we only could here, and here was the right atrium. So again, every single structure has a neighbor. You need to know the neighbor so you can go and map the opposite side when you fail. The last few minutes, I'm going to talk about the other side, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because my next colleague will talk about most of this. I'm just going to talk about two things, especially this last structure, which is the right-left junction. These are PVCs or VTs that are on the left side of the midlane. And because they're on the left side of midlane, they're negative in one and more negative in AVL than AVR. These are the structures to consider. Most of this will be covered after, and the right-left junction I will cover briefly. This is the most classic PVC. It's anterior RVOT. The key to understand here where you fail is that this could have a pouch right below the pulmonic artery that is extremely left, and it touches this structure right here, which is the left atrial appendage. And people get scared of pushing left. But if you see it on ice and you know you're below the pulmonic valve, you're not going to cause any damage. And of course, with contact force, it works very well. PaceMap here is very useful. When you have to look at the LVOT, my best approach to this is forget about the cause and everything else and understand the concept of the LV ostium. Because really what we're mapping is the ventricle around the opening of the ventricle, and the left ventricle in particular, to the outflow tract. And what we use is the cusps and the arteries to get to this area. One perfect example is here, the left coronary cusp. I will not cover LV summit or anything else because, as I said, will happen afterwards. But when we look at this area right there, it's the left coronary cusp. The difference is you got an earlier transition because you're more basal into the left ventricle. This is as easy as it is for anterior RVOT. And the key here, just for a tip, it's avoid burning the left main. How do we do that nowadays? We look at ICE. We published this year or last year, and in which you can just simply look at the view here, and you see the left main. You can put color, you identify, you stay below. Most of the time, we don't have to do this. This is the only critical aspect to burning in the left coronary cusp. You have to have a very early signal. Otherwise, I would not burn there, to be honest with you. Finally, the last area that I will cover is this classic EKG. Whenever you see this notch in V1, in something that doesn't play neither on the positive in one rule or the negative in one rule, you have to think of this particular structure, this extension of muscle between the right and the left coronary cusp. We call it the right-left junction. And this is a particular area of interest for us. When we see this EKG with direct attention, usually right into the right-left junction. This is the right coronary cusp, this is the left coronary cusp. You can see the catheter placed there, and careful attention, usually with a loop. Good contact force, vector orientation pointing out. These three aspects are key. And when you have that and you see these potentials, you know you're in a good place. And you cannot argue where this catheter is positioned because this green tip in Cartosound tells you exactly the tip localization of the ablation catheter. It's right between the right and the left junction. The only advice in this setting, technically speaking, is make sure you measure what you are measuring. And not everything that looks early is really early, because this early signal around the cusp simply represent diastolic closing of the valves. So in this case, I would never measure here. I would measure here. This particular patient, it's early. If you see this same potential in sinus rhythm, it simply represents diastolic activation. So if your true potential is not early, don't burn there because you're not going to have any success. So it's important to understand the anatomy because simply a PVC can be mapped for multiple aspects. And you can see here something that looked early in the pulmonary artery. I resist the temptation of burning here because sometimes the LAD runs through there. So I map everywhere. And when you map everywhere, within a few minutes guided by eyes, you can find your different activation times, and you go for the earliest one. Of course, the pulmonary artery looked nice, but opposite to that, my neighbor, the right-left junction, looked super nice and clearly was much better than burning here. So this concept is very important to understand. I will finalize by saying that not everything that we know will look early is where we're going to target. This is an example of what we've been doing lately, and I'm sure the next speaker will cover more, which is mapping inside of the venous circulation. You would never ablate here for this PVC. However, in this site, we were successful because this catheter, which was not on the CS, was on a branch of the CS, and I will show you right now. It's very basal, going into a branch of the coronary sinus, of the great cardiac vein, I'm sorry. This would be the AIV. We have a wire in the AIV. Right here, you see late potentials in sinus rhythm in a very early signal. You cannot burn intramurally, and this is the last concept. Intramural PVCs escape many of our rules. And the only way we're going to learn how to map this is burning in the best site, either endocardial or epicardial, or finding ways to get to it. This site was successful simply because we were opposite to the best site, which was this bipole here on this decapolar catheter. So this is part of what we felt and the future of mapping and how to overcome these limitations on typical and atypical Aflotrax PVC. So I leave you with this very simple method that guides you to 90%, I would say at least, of the area of interest. And you divide this in these two groups, you're going to have to map the neighbors, learn your neighbors, and this, it's a recipe, in my opinion, for success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fermín, for your fantastic presentation. And now we move to the next one, which is entitled Aortomitral Continuity and Left Ventricular Summit Tachycardias by Yuki Komatsu.
Okay, I'm Yuki Komatsu from Japan, and it's a very great honor to be here, and thank you for the invitation. My talking is about the mapping and ablation of ventricular arrhythmias originating from the left ventricular summit. So the left ventricular summit is the, epicardial LV outflow tract region bounded by the bifurcation between the left LAD and circumflex. Thank you. And transected by the great cardiac vein at its junction with the AIVV. This region is the most superior portion of the epicardial LVOT. Some previous reports have demonstrated the further divided this region in apical and superior portions. The most challenging area is the superior portion of this triangle, which is usually inaccessible to the mapping and ablation catheter. This picture is from a nice review article of Dr. Enriquez and Dr. Garcia, and all very nice article. In long axis section, the most superior portion of the left LVOT is highlighted. And as you can see, the left ventricular summit is the epicardial aspect of this segment. So ablation of ventricular arrhythmias originating from the left ventricular summit is challenging because why is the challenging? The reason number one is the subepicardial site of origin. So endocardial ablation is difficult. The second, the close proximity of the coronary arteries and the presence of epicardial fat precludes the effective ablation through a percutaneous epicardial approach. And then one more possible reason of this difficulty is the lack of localization of origin due to the inaccessibility of the conventional diagnostic catheter in these specific regions. We focus on the coronary venous system. There are a lot of small branches, and the coronary venous branches have great individual variability compared to the arteries. But there may be a distinct communicating vein indicating these red arrows. This branch is at the junction of the GCV and the AIVV and located in close association with the left ventricular summit, as shown in the schema. We can call it summit communicating vein. If the detailed mapping inside this vein is feasible, it has a potential to localize the precise site of origin of this challenging VT. So we can do the wire mapping technique. It has been reported, and you can insert the Agilis sheath into the coronary sinus, and retrograde venography can confirm small branches of coronary venous system, then you can advance the angioplasty wire, which can record the unipolar electrogram. In Japan, two French microcatheter is available. The concept and aim of this strategy is to map the left ventricular summit is completely same as the wire mapping technique. At first, 6 French decapolar catheter with lumen is placed in the coronary sinus. Then 2 French microcatheter can be introduced through the lumen of the catheter and advanced into this communicating vein. This 2 French catheter has 8 electrodes with 5 millimeter inter-electrode spacing. It is soft and safely advanced into the small branches. As you can see, a decapolar catheter with an inner lumen is inserted into the coronary sinus as distal as possible with the guidance of a guide wire. The summit communicating vein and other small branches of the coronary venous system were visualized by the retrograde venography through the lumen of the catheter. Then the 2 French microcatheter is inserted through the lumen and advanced into the summit communicating vein. If needed, the distal portion of the microcatheter can be a little bit shaped in order to select veins and more easy to advance it into the small branches. This 2 French mapping catheter can provide bipolar electrogram at this specific region. Let me show one case. 41 years old female was referred for ablation of idiopathic VT. This is the QRS morphology: inferior axis, negative polarity in lead 1, left bundle branch block configuration. And as you can see, the 2 French microcatheter was introduced through the lumen of the decapolar catheter and advanced into the small branch close to the left ventricular summit. The local electrogram recorded at the microcatheter, this MC12 means that the very distal tip of the microcatheter showed the pre-potential that preceded the onset of the QRS by 47 milliseconds. A perfect pace map was obtained with the stimulus to QRS interval equal to the pre-potential to the QRS. It's obtained by the pace mapping at here. And the ablation catheter was positioned at the left coronary cusp that was closest site to the microcatheter, because we cannot push the ablation catheter into this small vein. So the previous presentation, we have to think about the opposite site to reach this region. The local electrogram with the increased scale of the amplitude in the middle panel showed the pre-potential preceding QRS complex, which might have been missed in the normal scale of the electrogram. Ablation at this site eliminates the target arrhythmia. This case highlights that direct monitoring of the local electrogram recorded in this small branch of the coronary venous system serves as a landmark of the ablation of VT originating from the LV summit. By using this strategy with 2 French mapping catheter, we evaluated the consecutive patients with ventricular arrhythmias originating from the vicinity of the summit communicating vein. I would like to show our data. We studied 31 consecutive patients with ventricular arrhythmias who underwent mapping the summit communicating vein by this catheter. Among these patients, 14 patients were found to have a site of origin in the vicinity of the summit communicating vein. The site of origin was confirmed to be near the summit communicating vein when the summit vein showed the earliest activation time during the arrhythmia with a good pace mapping. A control group consists of the remaining 17 patients from right ventricular outflow tract or aortic cusp. Let me show the case. This PVC had an inferior axis and exhibited neither right nor left Van der Branch-Brock morphology, let's say non-specific Van der Branch-Brock morphology. And lead 1 is negative polarity. We think that this is coming from the left side, so we mapped the cusp, ultimate continuity, and the great cardiac vein, but we cannot eliminate the PVC from left side. So we did the venography from the lumen catheter. Actually, this lumen catheter is inserted, pushed into the small vein. It's not in the GCV or ARVV, the main trunk. So we have to be careful because if you push the contrast very strongly, it may create a dissection of the venous system. So very slowly inject the contrast, and we confirm the summit communicating vein. And we slowly inserted the 2 French microcatheter into this vein. A perfect pace match was obtained at this distal electrode of this catheter. So again, we mapped the opposite side of this catheter because we cannot push the ablation catheter into this small vein. The local ventricular activation time recorded at the microcatheter preceded the onset of the QRS compress by 44 milliseconds. The ablation catheter was positioned at the right ventricular outflow tract, just opposite side of the microcatheter. The electrogram was not sharp in the ablation catheter, but preceded the QRS onset by 40 milliseconds. The interval of the activation time between this microcatheter and the ablation catheter was only 4 milliseconds. It means that the ablation catheter and the microcatheter is anatomically very close location. So the pace map at this ablation site was not perfect, particularly in lead 1, which was positive polarity, but almost identical to the clinical ventricular arrhythmias. So ablation at this site eliminated this tachycardia. This slide shows the ECG characteristics of this ventricular arrhythmias originating from this LV summit communicating vein. All inferior axis, the taller R wave in lead 3 than in lead 2, and a negative polarity in lead 1, a QS pattern in lead LVR and LVL with a Q-wave ratio in lead LVL, LVR of 1.3. It means the leftward origin, and non-specific Van der Branch-Brock morphology with an RS ratio in lead 1, V1 of 0.67. We compare the summit communicating vein patients, 14 patients versus control group, and there is no significant difference in the patient characteristics. But the earliest activation site where the ablation was performed among adjacent structures preceded the QRS onset by 22 milliseconds. And how about the pace map? The pace map at the ablation site matched the arrhythmia morphology in only 14% of patients. The procedure duration and ablation duration in patients with LV summit were significantly longer than the control group. the acute success rate was 47% of patients with summit communicating vein arrhythmias, which was lower success rate compared to the control group. However, in 2 patients with summit communicating vein ventricular arrhythmias who failed to achieve acute success, the delayed elimination of the arrhythmia was observed. Finally, 71% of the patients and 88% of patients in control group were free from recurrence of ventricular arrhythmia during follow-up. So what is the predictor of the successful ablation of summit communicating vein ventricular arrhythmias? We compared activation timings in successful and unsuccessful ablation of summit vein arrhythmias among the patients with these patients. The local activation time relative to the QRS onset is in the summit communicating vein was comparable between the successful group and failure group, about 34 milliseconds, 35 milliseconds. However, the activation interval between the communicating vein and ablation site was much shorter in successful group compared to the unsuccessful group. So, this slide shows a schematic diagram showing possible explanation of this finding. In the successful ablation group, the site of origin might locate relatively closer to the endocardium compared to the failure group, as because the endocardial RF region leads the origin. That location might result in a shorter activation time interval between the summit communicating vein and the earliest activation sites. So this results indicates that we should make an effort to put the ablation catheter as closer, anatomically as close as possible to the microcatheter or wire mapping catheter. The communicating vein at the summit may be confused with the coronary venous septal perforator vein. Although the septal perforator vein is a small branch of AIVV and run into the intraventricular septum, the communicating vein is located distal to the distal cardiac vein, great cardiac vein, and passes between the aortic and pulmonary annulus. The pace map obtained in the septal perforator usually exhibits left bundle branch block configuration with initial Q wave in lead V1 and relatively narrow QRS duration. And it has a monomorphic R wave in lead 1. These characteristics of the QRS obtained by the pace mapping at the septal perforator indicate the more septal intramural foci. These ECG characteristics were not observed during the pace mapping at the left ventricular summit. The limitation of this strategy is that some patients have no summit communicating vein, since the coronary venous system has a greater individual variability. So, for example, this slide shows the patient A, B, C has distinct branch at the left ventricular summit. However, in patient D, there is no communicating vein. So in this kind of patient, it's very difficult to map the small branches. So I would like to summarize the technique of the mapping of the small vein. Mapping the LV summit by 2 French catheter or angioplasty wire may allow for direct monitoring of the left ventricular summit and provide additional information that aids in the diagnosis of arrhythmias arising from the LV summit. the closer positioning of the ablation catheter to the microcatheter in the summit may be associated with a higher chance to suppress the ventricular arrhythmias. So one thing which is interesting is that we experience the delayed elimination of arrhythmias after ablation procedure. A recent report demonstrated that delayed efficacy in eliminating of arrhythmias originating from the LVOT, especially in patients who had immediate response to the radiofrequency delivery. However, the problem is that we often experience that multiple radiofrequency deliveries from multiple sites cannot have any positive responses if the site of origin is far from all ablation sites. So one previous study demonstrated the successful elimination of LV summit PVC by ablation directly at the small branch of the distal vein. However, in our experience, ablation catheter could not be advanced into this small vein, and also even if the distal tip is pushed in this ostium of the branch, maybe we get very high impedance preclude the radiofrequency delivery. So in this situation, we have to consider another strategy. So I would like to quickly overview this alternative approaches to get rid of the arrhythmias from the LV summit. We can consider ablation using an open irrigated electrode cooled with half normal saline. A previous study demonstrated that by decreasing ionic concentration and charge density in RF ablation using half normal saline instead of normal irrigation, large ablation lesion can be created. We can perform chemical ablation with coronary venous ethanol infusion. This technique was conventionally used in the septal branch of coronary artery. Several reports demonstrated the ethanol infusion in the branch of coronary venous system as an alternative to the arterial approach. I think it may be sometimes a little bit complicated because the injection must be done retrogradely with the occlusion of the proximal side of the vein with angioplasty balloon. And if the vein is very large with a lot of communicating and collateral branch, I'm not sure that it works safely. But if it's successfully done, we get a deeper lesion like this MRI picture. Bipolar ablation. You know that bipolar ablation can create a deeper lesion compared to the sequential unipolar ablation. But bipolar ablation for the LV summit VT can be performed by a two ablation catheter positioned at right ventricular outflow tract and LVOT, or the distal GCV and RVOT, or distal GCV and RVOT. The catheter positioning can be determined according to the patient anatomy and also the microcatheter or wire mapping to identify more precise location of the site of origin is important and useful to do this strategy. Needle ablation may be another option for the summit VT, but again, in any case, it is important to precisely determine the site of origin within this specific region. Last year, UCLA group published a case report describing intramyocardial radiofrequency ablation from coronary wire. They demonstrated that this strategy is a more localized and limited approach with less risk of AV block and less myocardial injury. Finally, the surgical approach can be the option. This is the case report from Tang's group, Dr. Tang's group, they did a totally endoscopic robotic approach by using Da Vinci to the epicardial LV summit. So direct visualization of the epicardium LV summit was done in this case report. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, direct monitoring of the local electrogram recorded in the small branches of coronary venous system may serve as a landmark of ablation target. However, if the site of origin is far from all ablation site from the non-communicating vein structures like RVOT or LVOT, and the multiple ablation cannot suppress the targeted ablation arrhythmia, we have to consider alternative approaches. And further studies are needed to evaluate the efficacy and safety of these alternative approaches to treat LV summit VT. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. We move now to the last presentation of this session. The title is Papillary Muscle Ventricular Tachycardias by Fermín García.
Gracias. Ok, yo creo que Antonio me pidió que la segunda charla la leyera en español. So the slides are in English, but voy a hablar en español. La idea de esta charla es transmitir el concepto de ablación de músculos papilares, pero con un algoritmo similar al del tracto de salida, que es entender el electro y entender la anatomía y el concepto fundamental de que para entender de dónde viene una arritmia de una estructura intracavitaria, la única forma de verlo es con eco intracardíaco. Esto es un electro clásico que lo vamos a discutir de una taquicardia del músculo papilar posteromedial. Al abrir el eco vemos la estructura flotando, que es el músculo posteromedial, pero las otras cosas importantes van a ser la idea de que puede haber algún sustrato. Si ven la punta de este papilar es un poquito más blanca que el resto del papilar, y al combinar el mapeo directo basado en visualización por eco, de colocar el catéter en la estructura que pensamos bien en la arritmia basada en el electro, podemos ver las características electrofisiológicas en ritmo sinusal, un potencial tardío, en taquicardia ventricular, un potencial pre-QRS y ablación ilímina. Entonces, el concepto de esta charla es tratar de entender cómo llegamos aquí, porque la fluoroscopia, evidentemente, al menos seguro para estructuras intracavitarias, nos da muy poca definición de las estructuras que estamos mapeando. Esta es la misma imagen en RAO y LAO de la localización de este catéter en el músculo posteromedial. Basado en esto, nosotros hicimos un review hace 2 años y lo que yo voy a presentar es el concepto anatómico, los patrones electrocardiográficos y cómo hacemos el mapeo y considerar la ablación de esto, basados al final en algunos casos. Las estructuras intracavitarias son muy variables anatómicamente, macroscópicamente. En el ventrículo derecho tenemos el ventrículo derecho que se le quita la pared anterior y tienes la estructura que va del septum a la pared libre, en distancia variable del ápex y en tamaño, que es lo que se conoce como la banda septomarginal o la banda moderadora. Esta banda moderadora se une en la pared lateral, a la pared libre del ventrículo derecho, y ya vamos a ver la importancia de eso. Tenemos otras estructuras intracavitarias que pueden producir electros similares, que son los músculos papilares que sostienen a la válvula tricúspide. En el ventrículo derecho es un poco más, digamos, constante, pero igual es muy variable. Fíjate las estructuras intracavitarias dentro del ventrículo izquierdo. Nosotros en realidad no nos imaginamos la complejidad de estas estructuras anatómicas. Tenemos un grupo inferior y septal, que es el grupo de los músculos posteromediales, y un grupo más anterior, superior y lateral, que son los músculos anterolaterales. Y para complicar todo, sobre todo en las estructuras izquierdas, existen estas estructuras que se conocen como falsas cuerdas o cuerdas tendinosas que pueden conectar un músculo papilar con el otro, un músculo papilar a la pared, un músculo papilar al septo, un músculo papilar a los fascículos, lo cual confunde mucho probablemente el momento de ablación y de mapeo de estas estructuras. A mí me gusta mucho esta descripción de Tawara hace muchos años, cuando uno piensa en la correlación histológica, anatómica y el sistema de conducción, porque el otro concepto en papilares es que está muy asociado al sistema de conducción. Y si ustedes ven aquí la descripción de él dice que la rama derecha viene a través de la banda moderadora, cruza el ventrículo derecho, llega a la pared libre de la unión de la banda moderadora con la pared libre, y en ese nivel se extiende en el plexo subepicárdico hacia el tracto de salida y el cono arterioso de la pared libre del ventrículo derecho y termina de nuevo en el septum. Imagínense la complejidad anatómica y del sistema de conducción combinado al momento de uno tratar de empezar a tener algún sentido de lo que estamos haciendo, y probablemente esto explica muchas de las razones por las cuales estas arritmias pueden ser malignas. La histología, en la punta de los papilares hay tejido fibroso asociado con tejido muscular, tanto en el ventrículo derecho como en el ventrículo izquierdo. Toda la estructura septal, incluso encima de los papilares, está muy cercano al sistema de conducción, haciendo la diferenciación de que si bien puede haber sistema de Purkinje encima de los papilares, las ramas y la rama izquierda y los fascículos son de verdad septales, lo cual es diferente. Y la microscopia es interesante porque dentro de los músculos papilares y de las cuendas tendinosas hay células de Purkinje, hay células que tienen coloración para marcadores del sistema nervioso autónomo. O sea que estamos hablando de una estructura muscular que potencialmente está conectada al sistema de Purkinje local y además podría estar conectada al sistema nervioso autónomo. Es algo especial que creo que es lo que hace en parte la complejidad de entender estas arritmias y por qué se pueden presentar de cualquier forma. Pueden presentarse en corazones normales y anormales, como extrasístoles ventriculares, taquicardias no sostenidas, taquicardia sostenida, y una de las cosas que a mí más soy humble, le tengo respeto, es a los triggers de ventricular fibrillation de estas estructuras, porque en realidad no sabemos por qué pasa. Puede ser por trigger activity, anormalidad, obviamente relacionada con catecolaminas, y es clásicamente arritmias que no las podemos inducir con estimulación programada, y el entrainment es un entrainment de activación, no un entrainment de una arritmia de reentrada. Para hacerlo más complicado, esto puede estar presente en pacientes con arritmias relacionadas con sustrato, como puede ser en cardiomiopatía isquémica y en síndromes de la válvula, del prolapso de la válvula mitral. En estas circunstancias, usualmente son infartos inferiores o de la circunfleja que involucran los músculos papilares, y esto se ve claramente en el eco intracardíaco al momento de estar en el laboratorio. Son músculos que están retraídos y densos. Y un síndrome que voy a hablar al final, pero que le tengo mucho respeto, es tratar de entender qué pacientes con prolapso de válvula mitral van a tener riesgo de muerte súbita. Y les enseñaré un caso que es bastante preocupante. En nuestras series de triggers de VF, cuando nosotros vemos los números que hemos tenido y similar a otras series, más del 50% de los triggers de ventricular fibrillation están relacionados de alguna forma, bien sea con el sistema de Purkinje o directamente con estructuras intracavitarias, bien sea de los músculos posteromediales o de la banda moderadora. Los patrones electrocardiográficos de reconocimiento los hemos publicado y hay muchos algoritmos. Yo creo que lo básico es entender tres grupos: músculo anterolateral, músculo posteromedial y estructuras intracavitarias derechas. El primer grupo, que son los anterolaterales, tienen esto que llamamos nosotros una discordancia en los inferior leads, en los leads inferiores, que es clásico. Para el anterolateral, por la localización anterior y lateral y flotando, pensamos nosotros, tiene un eje particularmente interesante que es usualmente bloqueo de rama derecha con una transición en B3 o B4 porque no es una estructura muy basal, pero tiene usualmente negatividad en 2 y positividad en 3 con un eje derecho. Y esto es clásico de esta zona en el músculo posteromedial, y por alguna razón obviamente estamos flotando, por eso da una negatividad en 2, pero da una negatividad en 3 porque estamos más del lado derecho de la línea media, algo así vectorialmente, tratando de entenderlo, pero es un patrón bastante clásico. El músculo posteromedial, a su diferencia, se encuentra en todo el medio de la línea media. Usualmente es un eje superior con bloqueo de rama derecha, y la diferenciación aquí básica va a ser con fasciculares, y ya lo vamos a discutir en un minuto. Y la banda moderadora y las estructuras intracavitarias derechas tienen una discordancia inferior opuesta al anterolateral, usualmente son más negativas en 3 que en 2 y tienen obviamente bloque de rama izquierda con transición tardía y un eje derecho, usualmente izquierdo, usualmente positivas en 1. Y cuando uno ve estos 3 patrones clásicos, uno ve el electro y ya, yo de nuevo no quiero que ustedes salgan de aquí pensando que van a encontrar el sitio perfecto de ablación. Lo que quiero que salgan es diciendo en qué área, en qué zona postal, lo llamo yo en inglés, el zip code del corazón usted va a mapear. Y cada una de estas 3 estructuras son completamente diferentes en el patrón electrocardiográfico. Una vez que usted entiende esto, después va a guiar el mapeo. En cuanto a la diferenciación entre fascicular y posteromedial, son electros muy similares, 2 grupos, y ahora un tercer estudio de nuestro grupo han visto esto. Usualmente la duración del QRS no es muy útil, pero hay 3 cosas que son útiles. Una es ver al lead 1 y ABL. En las del papilar usualmente no hay onda Q porque no hay activación septal. En las fasciculares usualmente hay una pequeña Q inicial. Ambos en el grupo de Michigan y el de nosotros encontramos lo mismo. Y el patrón en B1 es muy útil. Si uno ve este patrón clásico de R' hacia abajo con slurred, aunado a estas características en 1 y ABL, usualmente uno puede distinguir fácilmente entre un fascicular, en este caso acá, o un papilar. Y esta es la forma de distinguirlos. Obviamente, lo más fácil es verlo uno al lado del otro. Esto es un paciente arriba con una taquicardia ventricular del papilar y abajo un paciente con taquicardia ventricular fascicular. En 1 y ABL, el de abajo tiene una onda Q inicial. En 1 y ABL, el de arriba no tiene Q inicial en 1 y ABL. Aquí hay una R con slur hacia abajo y aquí hay un RS'. Esto distingue al menos hacia dónde vas a guiar el mapeo, enfocándote más hacia la parte septal fascicular versus al músculo papilar per se. Otro clásico finding de esto es que tú puedes hacer un EKG y ves una electrocardiograma y a los 5 minutos totalmente diferente o con alguna variación. Y es la misma taquicardia, el mismo paciente. Sencillamente un concepto importante que es muy útil al momento de hacer la ablación es que estas arritmias, bien sea por la conexión con los fasciculares o por cuerdas tendinosas, pueden tener salidas diferentes. O sea que mapear la salida o la región más temprana no necesariamente te da el punto de success. Otra cosa que a veces es challenging y lo cual también va con este concepto de múltiples salidas. Esto fue un paciente que me tocó hacer ablación y básicamente se presentó así. Tenía una extrasístole, ritmo sinusal, una extrasístole que parecía anterolateral acoplada con una extrasístole que parecía posteromedial. Y así seguía, posteromedial, anteroseptal, posteromedial, anterolateral, y se iba alternando. Y esto lo ves clásicamente y la única forma podría ser o tienes 2 sitios diferentes o 2 focos diferentes o tienes un mismo foco con salidas hacia los 2 lados. Y aquí es donde empezamos a pensar en cuerdas tendinosas, etcétera, que se pueden ver muy bien en eco intracardíaco. Al momento de llevar al paciente al laboratorio para mapear, la estrategia tiene que ser una de muy poca sedación porque la sedación clásicamente hace que se desaparezcan. Nos gusta parar las drogas antiarrítmicas y siempre viene la pregunta, bueno, ¿qué prefieres, Fermín? ¿Prefieres retroórtico o prefieres transeptal? Y la respuesta es, depende del paciente. Uno ve en eco, ahorita se los enseñaré, si la orientación favorece retrógrado o transeptal y a veces tenemos que hacer las 2 porque es necesario para buscar el mejor sitio de contacto. O sea, que no necesariamente uno tiene que pensar que uno va a hacer una u otra, tienes que estar preparado para hacer las 2. Y lo que es básico es entender el eco intracardíaco y pudiese ser útil si usted tiene, además de eco, integración con sistemas de mapeo. Esta es la vista clásica, el catéter está localizado en el ventrículo derecho y aquí está esto simultáneamente. Aquí reconstruimos el posteromedial y el anterolateral y sencillamente haciendo clock al catéter, uno va del septo, vio el posteromedial, ahora empieza a abrir el anterolateral, en este caso tiene 2 cabezas, está pegado a la válvula mitral y si uno quiere volver a ir al posteromedial, sencillamente da counter clock y aquí ves que el eco va a bajar hacia abajo y vas al posteromedial. Y de ahí tienes posteromedial, anterolateral y a veces, pues, obviamente, si ves las estructuras tendinosas, pues será más fácil. La otra cosa que es útil es la localización del catéter, que lo tienes aquí mismo y ahora se los voy a dar en más detalle. Entonces, eco solamente no es importante para la localización anatómica. by the way, también sirve obviamente para la definición de las estructuras intracavitarias. En este caso tenemos aquí la banda moderadora que la podemos reconstruir, viene hacia acá y tienes un músculo papilar que soporta la válvula tricúspide, en este caso aquí presente, y es la misma cosa, excepto que aquí el eco está colocado en el ventrículo derecho y estamos viendo hacia abajo y vemos las estructuras intracavitarias y la pared libre y el septo del ventrículo derecho. Y esas son las estructuras. Una de las cosas que es importante reconocer, que es una de las fallas de la fuerza de contacto, es que para tú usar fuerza de contacto, tú tienes que saber dónde estás aplicando la fuerza de contacto. Muchas veces para hacer la ablación de los papilares, tenemos que estar en la punta del papilar. Entonces la tendencia siempre es a ver el número de la fuerza de contacto. Y lo que pasa frecuentemente es la tendencia a empujar el catéter más duro. Y aquí te das cuenta, si bien aquí yo preferiría una fuerza de contacto de 27 que de 2, pero fíjate, aquí el catéter ya no está en el músculo papilar, está tocando la pared libre del ventrículo izquierdo. Entonces, tienes que tener mucho cuidado, no solamente ver la fuerza de contacto en estos casos, pero sino la estructura que estás tocando para transmitir esa fuerza de contacto. Tercera aplicación del eco, ya se las había dado como un dato inicial, que es ver la posibilidad, yo no digo que siempre sea normal, pero la posibilidad que yo veo el electro y me imagino en cuál de las tres estructuras viene y voy a tratar de ver si hay alguna normalidad que se sugiera. En este caso vemos un músculo papilar anterolateral que es grueso, pero la punta está un poco más blanca. Entonces usted dirá, bueno, ¿esto puede ser algo normal o puede ser algo anormal? Obviamente que si la arritmia viene de esa zona, decidimos. La otra cosa, cuando yo veo un músculo papilar así, digo, bueno, esto está muy cerca de la válvula mitral. Y si yo me voy transeptal aquí y entro directo, voy a estar mucho más fácil que retrógrado. Y este es el sentido de utilizar el eco también para saber si es mejor mapear retrógrado o transeptal, porque sencillamente decides qué approach te pone en dirección correcta y aventajosa para ti para mapear esta estructura en particular. En este caso, es un paciente de nuevo con esta estrasístole. Clasificamos rápidamente bloqueo de rama derecha, transición en B3, más negativo en 2 que en 3, eje derecho. A mí se me ocurre que esto viene del anterolateral y ahí voy a ir a mapear el anterolateral. Es una estrasístole muy short couple, este es un paciente con fibrilación ventricular y vemos esta zona un poco más blanca, más ecogénica. Usted dirá, bueno, a lo mejor eso es normal o no. Y aquí yo creo que es donde viene la diferencia. Al uno colocar el catéter en el músculo de interés y al demostrar que ese músculo tiene potenciales tardíos, uno estimula el músculo y podrás ver, esto es uno de los slides más bonitos que yo tengo porque es continuo. La estrasístole era temprana en ese músculo y el PaceMap era perfecto con un STIM to QRS que es igual al potencial a QRS. Tú sabes que ese es el sitio adecuado. Entonces la idea no solamente es guiarte basado en el electro y en la estructura en eco, potencialmente descubrir un sustrato, pero después comprobar con mapeo y con características de electrograma si ese sustrato potencialmente en la imagen en realidad corresponde a un tejido de cicatriz o no, y ya les voy a enseñar más. Al momento de hacer la ablación y el mapeo, yo pienso que la mejor forma es de verdad buscar la zona más temprana, usualmente empezando en la punta del papilar, yéndose hacia abajo, porque esto es lo que nos ha demostrado mejor success, porque la zona de abajo es más amplia y usualmente vienen más hacia arriba en el papilar que hacia abajo. Y nos gusta tratar de inducirlas si no están presentes, pero esto usualmente falla. Y por supuesto, como les dije, los potenciales anormales. ¿Cómo hacer ablación? Ya se los voy a enseñar. A veces aceleración es un buen signo. Siempre usamos irrigado. Ya yo me he ido de 30, 40, ya vamos por 50, porque sencillamente el problema aquí es contacto. Y si de verdad tú estás flotando en la punta del papilar, es muy poco probable que perfores nada. Si estás en contra de la pared entre el papilar y la cavidad del ventrículo, tienes que tener mucho cuidado porque un steam pop en esa zona puede producir una perforación en el ventrículo izquierdo. Voy a explicarles la utilidad de cryo, lo cual yo pienso que tiene una utilidad importante en los papilares y algunas otras herramientas. El endpoint siempre va a ser la eliminación, pero estos son los pacientes que a mí me gusta quedarme en el laboratorio al menos una hora porque clásicamente tú dices, qué bien, todo sale bien. Van a la zona de recuperación y ahí empiezan a tener estrasístoles si esperaste nada más 10 minutos, así que nos gusta esperar un poco. Esto es un eco de un compañero para nada más demostrarle qué pasa cuando hace a veces 50 vatios. Está aquí el catéter en perfecta posición, el papilar, él empezó a 50 vatios y tuvo un steam pop directo. Esto, en esta localización, aparte de que Obviamente no lo haría muchas veces porque técnicamente podrías dañar el papilar y la válvula mitral, pero lo importante de esto, lo que les quiero enseñar, es que nunca la punta de este catéter puede estar metido por debajo del papilar, encuñado entre el papilar y el ventrículo, porque ese steam pop no tiene dónde explotar sino hacia afuera. Si está flotando, explota en la cavidad. Si está encuñado, produce una perforación. Eso lo tienen que tener con mucho cuidado. Es muy importante reconocer esto. Al momento de hacer ablación, usted piensa que está en el sitio adecuado, empieza a dar ablación y date cuenta de lo que pasa con el electro. Cambies de un anterolateral clásico a una salida que es mucho más alta. Sencillamente estás modificando la salida de las trasístoles, no estás modificando el sitio de origen. Esto no es una buena señal, aquí hay que parar y redirigir el mapeo porque no estás en el sitio adecuado. Y esto lo hemos visto un par de veces, por eso siempre cuando hacemos la ablación ponemos el PRUCA o lo que estés usando a 25, 50 y en el 12 lead EKG para poder reconocer estos cambios electrocardiográficos. Es esencial. Cryo lo hemos conseguido muy útil en ciertos casos, sobre todo en pacientes muy jóvenes con corazones verticales. Este es el catéter y este es el problema. Esto es un corazón muy vertical. En un paciente de 18 años puedes ver la dificultad de poner el catéter. Al momento de empezar cryo, lo bueno es sencillamente que el catéter se congela en el tejido. Y lo único que sirve cryo aquí, más que todo, es sencillamente por estabilidad. Al momento del catéter enfriarse y tocar el papilar, pues ahora se mueve con el tejido. Y bien, pues que tengas una lesión más pequeña, pero vas a tener una lesión más efectiva porque estás en contacto con el tejido. Lo hemos utilizado también en banda moderadora. Esto es un papilar en el ventrículo derecho y lo puedes ver acá claramente. Al momento de congelarse, queda congelado perfecto, tienes perfecto contacto. Y esto es un paciente que, pues, obviamente, al empezar la congelación, ves la eliminación de las trasístoles. Otra posibilidad, cortesía de Hiroshi Nakagawa, que usan estereotaxis, es este concepto. Yo creo que es útil. El problema es que estereotaxis hoy en día está desapareciendo y no lo hay en muchas partes, ni siquiera lo utilizamos nosotros tanto que lo tenemos, pero es un buen concepto porque demuestra lo que pasa cuando estamos haciendo esto en vivo y lo que potencialmente pudiera pasar si tienes un catéter que fuera más flexible, que tenga mejor contacto con el tejido. Y la limitación es siempre con ese contacto. Entonces, ¿cuál es la ventaja de la crioablación? La ventaja de la crioablación es que tienes mejor contacto. El único dato que les puedo dar es siempre avanzarla con una vaina que esté dentro del ventrículo, nunca tratar de curvar el catéter en la aorta ascendente porque es demasiado rígido y tenemos un caso donde hubo una disección aórtica por tratar de curvar el catéter de Clayer en la aorta. Nunca, mi recomendación es hacerlo ahí o hacerlo retrógrado. Finalmente, algunos casos sencillos donde demostramos las diferentes cosas. Esto es un paciente con extrasístoles de banda moderadora y fibrilación ventricular. Este lo hice hace 2 semanas, un paciente de 15 años, se presentó con este tipo de arritmia. Inmediatamente, al uno ver esto, dice, esto viene de una estructura intracavitaria del ventrículo izquierdo porque es clásicamente el electro que sabemos y nos vamos directo a mapear en esa zona. El único concepto que les estoy dando aquí es el concepto de localización. Aquí te das cuenta que esto era un papilar pequeño que estaba aquí. Y una de las cosas que hemos aprendido a hacer, en vez de hacer el approach para tener mejor contacto con radiofrecuencia, aquí la primera ablación elimina, puedes ver ablation on y la extrasístole elimina, el paciente llegó así y salió así del laboratorio. Pero el concepto aquí es este, en vez de tratar de hacer contacto empujando hacia adelante, es utilizar el eco para usar la anatomía a tu favor. Entonces pones una vaina deflectable, el catéter de ablación paralelo a la pared libre del ventrículo derecho y uno engage la estructura intracavitaria desde el lado opuesto y la jala hacia atrás. Y de esa forma tienes muchísimo mejor contacto que si lo tratas de hacer approach tocándolo desde adelante. Y esto es una maniobra que nos ha resultado últimamente mucho mejor success rate que en las maniobras anteriores cuando lo tratábamos de hacer. Esto sencillamente es un ejemplo de sustrato con 3 combinaciones, que es eco intracardíaco, electrograma y realce tardío en MRI en un paciente post cirugía de válvula mitral por prolapso con taquicardia ventricular sostenida. De nuevo, solamente para corroborar que estas anormalidades que vemos en eco pueden ser reales cuando están combinadas con electrogramas o MRI. Finalmente, esto es un caso que para mí es muy importante. Yo vi a este paciente, muy importante no, me abre los ojos. Yo vi a un familiar de este paciente porque vino por una segunda opinión porque su familiar tuvo muerte súbita. Yo busqué el reporte de la autopsia y la autopsia sencillamente dice que la paciente tenía una válvula mitral mildly prolapsing con fibrosis extensa del ventrículo izquierdo. Y después busqué más en los récords y conseguí un electro que le habían hecho en algún momento. La paciente esencialmente murió durante el sueño. Y yo creo que esto es importante, es ver para el reset stratification un electro normal en ritmo sinusal, porque tiene ondas T invertidas, algo que nosotros no pensáramos que fuera tan importante, con extrasístoles del papilar anterolateral. Pero después, yo creo que esto es un signo muy importante, que son dos morfologías, pero de nuevo alternando entre una y en otra, un papilar anterolateral con un papilar posteromedial. Obviamente que yo no sé qué pasó, este paciente murió súbitamente, pero este es el electro y esto nos tiene que hacer pensar solamente cómo hacer reset stratification, y una de las cosas que yo creo que va a tener más boga en esta época es program stimulation. Si uno induce VT, los pacientes tienen más riesgo, pero la combinación de fibrosis en el MRI con morphology, multiple morphologies, tiene que hacer de repente considerar pacientes que puedan tener más riesgo de muerte súbita que no. En conclusión, múltiples arritmias, benignas y malignas, específicos patrones electrocardiográficos. La ablación es difícil sencillamente por la variabilidad anatómica, por la dificultad de entrar al sustrato intramural y por los problemas relacionados con estabilidad en contacto. Por eso la reconstrucción y el uso de eco intracardíaco es esencial. Usar irrigación con vainas deflectables o no deflectables, cualquier maniobra que te mejore la fuerza de contacto es esencial. High power, pero con cuidado. A veces half normal selling, y yo creo que cryoablation es una opción real porque nos mejora la estabilidad para hacer una lesión en una estructura que se está moviendo. Muchas gracias.